Keil moli rachamim, shoichein b'amaroimim. Hamtzei menuchen achoin al kanfei ashchina, b'malois kedoshim, utahoirim, kezoihar, horokia mazhirim. Es nishmois, hashishim ribu Yehudim, shenehergu, v'shenishchutu, v'shenisrufu, v'shenisufu al kiddush Hashem. Began Eden teimunu chasam, lochein balo rachamim, yastireim b'seisek nalfav le'olamim, v'yitzroer b'tzroer achayim es nishmoiseim, Hashem unachalasam, v'yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavam, v'noimar, Amen.
Almighty God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, provide a sure rest upon the wings of the divine presence, within the levels of the holy and the pure, whose countenance shines like the sky, the souls of the 6 million Jews who were murdered, slaughtered, burnt, and exterminated for the sanctification of your name, by the Nazi assassins and their collaborators. Let the Garden of Eden be their repose. May the Master of Mercy protect them forever in the protective shelter of his wings, and bind their souls with the bonds of life. The eternal is their heritage, and they shall rest peacefully where they fell. And let us say, Amen.
It's really hard to do what's right. Be a beacon in the darkest night. You and I must fight the hardest fight to make our future bright. To make our future bright. When innocence can stand and weep, seems fast asleep, and people just don't seem to care. Injustice everywhere. Injustice everywhere. It's really hard to do what's right. Be a beacon in the darkest night.
My name is Marta Josephs. I'm the daughter of Andrew Frankel, a Holocaust survivor. My beloved father died just over 6 years ago, leaving a huge gap in our lives. He was a kind, patient and moral man, and I still think of him whenever I have a moral dilemma. As there are fewer and fewer Holocaust survivors able to tell their stories, we, the second generation, feel a huge burden of responsibility for keeping the lessons of the Holocaust alive. You might say, it was all such a long time ago, more than several lifetimes for the members of our choir. Why keep these dreadful memories alive? As I watch the television and read the newspapers, I see all around man's inhumanity to man. After the atrocities of the Holocaust, you would have thought that the world would have learned a lesson, but it's obvious that it has not. And anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head again, here and in the rest of Europe, as well as America, Canada, and the Middle East. And much to the horror of the second generation, people are already starting to deny that the Holocaust ever happened. As the late former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said, anti-Semitism is like the canary in the coal mine. It warns the world that there is something very wrong with society as a whole, and we ignore this warning at our peril. So it's up to people like you and me to learn from the lessons of the past and to become beacons in these darkest nights to remind the world what can happen if good people do nothing.
Hello, my name is Trevor Avery and I'm the director of the Lake District Holocaust Project, based in Windermere, of all places. Not something that you would have expected to find just a short while ago. I'm based in a location which has become synonymous with light after darkness across the world now, through appearing in drama, documentary, all manner of things. And it's a quite extraordinary journey. We'll begin, in our instance, on the 14th of August 1945. It was the day that 300 children, survivors of the Holocaust, who'd actually been in the concentration camps and survived, arrived at Carlisle Airport, Crosby-on-Eden as it was then, and were then brought from there to a small place called Cargarth Estate, just outside Windermere Village. For them, it was, as they've said in their own words, like arriving in paradise from hell. The paradise that they talk about is, of course, the hills and the mountains and the lakes and the fresh air. We all know that this is the Lake District of Wordsworth, of Ruskin, of Beatrix Potter. We know it's a beacon around the world for romanticism, for rest and recuperation against the problems of modern life and stresses. But for these children, it was especially so that paradise was much more than the landscape. It was food, it was their own bedroom, linen. It was a gentleness and a kindliness of the local people that they hadn't had experience for up to 5-6 years, even longer. They had been in the ghettos, they had been in the concentration camps, and when I tell you the list of names that these 300 children are linked to, it's an A to Z of horror. Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Warsaw Ghetto, Lodz Ghetto, leaving aside those dreadful extermination camps established with only one aim in life, and death, and that was mass murder. These children lost their families in places such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, Chełmno. So the children that came here were the remnants of what was a thriving European community of Jews across Europe, and it was wiped out almost in a generation. So the ones that came to Windermere, we were very, very fortunate to have them amongst us. There were anxious thoughts before the children arrived as to how these locals would respond to this mass arrival of largely teenagers, exuberant, excited teenagers, survivors. How would these get on with the local people? And as one of the carers said on their arrival and when they witnessed the relationship between them, we need not have worried. And this is what I want to get to. Be the light in the darkness. I've known many of these survivors for many, many years, and I've talked to them privately and publicly a long time. And what comes out of their stories was their arrival in the Lake District, in Cumbria, the brightness of colours. Ike Alterman recalls arriving at Carlisle Airport, being taken into a large dark hangar and seeing bright white bread and bright red jam. I haven't seen it for years. He remembers the distinct brown colouring of the tea with milk in, as he says. And the arrival in Windermere, waking up in the morning, Sir Ben Helfgott, who 10 years later would be weightlifting for Britain at the Olympics. Sir Ben talks about the greenness of it all. Hit them after where they'd come from. Maya Hirsch, one of the guys that came, survived Auschwitz-Birkenau for 18 months at a time when the average lifespan would be 20 minutes. If you're lucky, 3 months. He managed 18 months. It left him with deep problems psychologically, but Maya didn't buckle. He was incredibly resilient. But he remembers visiting Auschwitz many years later and being stunned by the grass there. He said, when we were there wasn't a blade of grass. If a blade of grass was seen, we would pick it up and we'd eat it. Suddenly they're in Windermere, they're in the Lake District, plenty of bread, plenty of food. Bob Obachowski made a comment of seeing white bread. We thought it was cake, but he also noted the orange marmalade. And he had something of an addiction for that for the rest of his life. So colours come into this, vibrant colours, the light in the darkness. So there was the physical colours, but there was also the lightness of the people here. And what comes across when you talk to these survivors, they said for the first time in years, in the words of Minia J, for instance, she was one of the girls who came, we were treated with dignity for the first time in years. A big lorry turned up one day onto Calgarth Estate. The back was open, the Jewish children stood around the back as the truck doors opened, they're on board, many, many bicycles. The locals said, use them, these are yours, go and explore the Lake District. Others set up a radio set at Calgarth Estate, simply for the Jewish children to listen to Polish voices, the Polish radio that they'd grown up with in their young lives. When they came to England, they were desperate to learn English, but their hearts were still in Poland, in their communities. So the locals set up a radio station for them. The local baker handed donuts and buns to the local children and to the Jewish children, said, help yourselves. These small acts of kindness. One small girl who lived on Calgarth Estate won a prize at the local gala on the estate. She then took this small charm and she handed it over to one of the small Jewish children. The head teacher of the school at Calgarth said to her, why did you give that away? And the small child from Calgarth said, because I have everything and she has nothing. Other small gangs of children would run to some of the hostels that were on Calgarth Estate. This is the estate behind me, just on the right. And they'd run over to the halls and they'd pick flowers, and they'd hand flowers up to an open window. And the girls inside would reach out and take the flowers from them. They were still in isolation, but those Jewish girls remembered the kindness, a simple gesture. Be the light in the darkness. Can you imagine what these gestures meant to these children? Years and years of living in ghettos and in concentration camps, and these children and youngsters, they've been surrounded by Jewish children. The only non-Jewish people they'd ever met were the brutal guards and the system. Let's face it, the German guards, the Ukrainian, the Lithuanian, the ones cherry-picked to run these camps. That was their experience of people who weren't Jewish. So when they came here and this kindness was shown to them by these people they didn't know, the people on the wall behind me, ordinary working class British people, brought here themselves to work at a nearby aircraft factory. And one of these small Jewish children turned to one of the carers and said, "Who are these people being kind to us?" And the carer said to these children, "These are not Jewish people being kind to you. These are ordinary British working class people." And the child responded to the carer, "These are good people. This is a good country." Now, can you imagine what their impressions of this country would have been if they'd had a different kind of response on their arrival? These children who'd seen everything. And believe you me, 60, 70, 75 years later, those impressions are still as huge now as they were then. So my message for you all, be the light in the darkness, is to show kindness to strangers in need, show dignity, afford kindness, small acts, not huge ones, small acts of generosity, of your time, of kindness, that you never know, 75 years' time, somebody may be looking into a camera and talking in the same way about the kindness and the gentleness of a community after the arrival of people who lived with unimaginable horror. And that legacy persists. It set them up for a new life, such that Sam Laskia, one of the people who came, he said, "My life began again in Windermere." And he kept a lifelong attachment to the area long after they'd all gone, moved on. They visited us very, very regularly because of the warmth that they found in this paradise of landscape, lakes and people.
Europe in the 1930s was an increasingly dark place, but many people found ways to bring light out of the darkness, illuminating the way ahead and providing hope for the future. These are just some of the Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors who, despite everything, have provided a beacon to light our way in the darkness and offer hope. The much-loved Mog and Tiger Who Came to Tea creator Judith Kerr fled to Switzerland from Germany with her family in 1933 on the day the Nazis came to power. The family eventually settled in Britain in 1936. She started a career as an artist before securing a script-writing job at the BBC and began writing her famous self-illustrated books when her own children were small. Kerr was appointed OBE in 2012 for services to children's literature and to Holocaust education. Ben Helfgott was 10 years old when the Nazis invaded Poland. He survived Buchenwald and Theresienstadt concentration camps. After he was liberated, Ben was brought to England with the Windermere Boys. Remaining in Britain, Ben discovered weightlifting and rose through the ranks to become captain of the British weightlifting team, representing Great Britain in 2 Olympic Games. In 2000, Sir Ben Helfgott received an OBE, and in 2018 he was made Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire in recognition of his contribution to Holocaust education. In 1938, at the age of 3, Erich Reich was deported from Austria with his family to Poland by the Nazis, before being brought to Berlin on the Kindertransport in 1939. He never saw his parents again. Arriving in England, aged just 4, and separated from his 2 older brothers, Eric was placed with a foster family in Dorking, Surrey, subsequently moving to London briefly before emigrating to the newly created State of Israel in 1949. When Eric eventually returned to Britain in 1967, he worked for the tour companies Thompson Holidays and Thomas Cook before setting up Classic Tours, his own charity fundraising company specialising in activity-based global travel. By the time he retired, aged 79, Eric's company had inspired over 40,000 people to raise £90 million for UK charities. In 2010, Sir Eric Reich was knighted in recognition of his contribution to charitable causes and his long service as chair of the Kindertransport in the UK. And finally, in this series of portraits of people who brought light out of darkness, the Bauer family were among the few survivors of Hitler's assault on Greece, where from a Jewish population in Thessalonica of 60,000, only 10,000 survived. A son was born to the Bauer family in 1961, and he studied veterinary medicine and biotechnology in Salonika, before moving to the USA in 1994, eventually becoming head of global vaccines at pharmaceutical giant Pfizer. Today, as CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla has led the company's superhuman efforts to discover and distribute a vaccine for COVID-19 to the entire world.
Last year, we marked a series of commemorations for the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. We marked the liberation of Belsen, Buchenwald, Auschwitz, and the other death camps. And I remarked on General Eisenhower's desire to see the atrocities were fully recorded so that they could not be denied. In the 21st century, we have a tremendous force for the broadcasting of good in the internet. Yet, like most man-made inventions, it is abused and has become a place where hate and misinformation are deliberately spread. You find time after time claims also that the Shoah is no longer taught in UK schools, a palpable falsehood. On a number of occasions, I've asked school children studying the Shoah if they thought it could happen again. Often they reply, it could not. Yet we need to reflect on subsequent genocides in very recent years in Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur, and even in Europe in Bosnia. Now we know what happened in the former Yugoslavia, and we mark the 25th anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre at the Civic Centre in July. More than 1 million Rohingya Muslims have fled persecution in Myanmar in the last year. And now we must be concerned about the Uyghur in China. Dr. Gregory Stanton has documented the view that there are 10 stages of genocide. Murder is the 9th stage, and the last is denial, which is already happening again in Srebrenica. Ruth Barnett, who came to the UK on the Kindertransport, has considered the Roma and Sinti Gypsies are about halfway on that scale, which for the record is dehumanisation. The Roma and Sinti themselves suffered in the Holocaust, of course, and so it's not a phenomenon consigned to even recent history. Jem Collins says, the signs are always there. Speaking in 2015, Ruth Barnett said, "It grieves me that there is so much focus on the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II and the Holocaust, while the centenary of the Ottoman genocide is overlooked. There is evidence to suggest that the Holocaust might have been prevented if impunity for it had not been created by failure to bring the previous genocide to justice and closure." Ruth was clear. She said, "Certainly the lessons of the Holocaust have not been learned. The fundamental lesson that all human beings are equal as human beings, we're a long way from that." As we face divisions, apparently ever widening, in Newcastle, we pride ourselves on being a warm, friendly, welcoming place. More than ever, we need to stand strong together and send a clear message that our city rejects hatred in all its forms and believes everyone is equal. That is why we're here today, not physically together, but joined by technology, owing to the unprecedented times of the coronavirus pandemic. Yet even there, we find conspiracy theories targeting minority groups with false blame. The theme as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day in 2021 is Be the light in the darkness. Every religion speaks of the light, often celebrated by the lighting of candles, but also metaphorically. A Christian hymn I know speaks of light as such. Spirit of truth and love, life-giving holy dove, speed forth thy flight. Move o'er the water's face, bearing the lamp of grace, and in earth's darkest place, let there be light. I want to close with a quotation from Martin Luther King, an honorary graduate of Newcastle University. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Thank you.
You